Hi everybody, my name is MelissaRoshan. I go by MelRo for short, and I currently work as the director for Ohio CASA's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Services Division. I also am a builder of 2 schools in Ghana and 11 homes in the Congo. I have done quite a bit of spokeswoman work for Dodge, Buick, and also Jeep. And I'm also an advocate for youth that live in foster care. And underneath that umbrella, I do a lot of things. And finally, I'm also a professional print model, having walked countless runways and been on the covers of magazines and all of the things. I'm a proud mother of 2 children. And what I'm most proud of is the fact that I'm a survivor. A survivor of what? Childhood trauma. Friends, I grew up my entire life in the foster care system. I was born to a 13-and-a-half-year-old mother who lived in foster care at that time because of family abuse. And when I was born to my mother, I was actually born as a preemie. I had an overactive adrenal gland due to trauma that my body had sustained while in vitro. And I was just a very sickly baby. My mother was in no shape to take care of a baby, and eventually, I experienced childhood trauma with her and had to be removed from her care and placed into what we all know is as kinship care. Now, while in kinship care, unfortunately, I experienced more family abuse and was taken away from that family member and placed into what would be one of my first of many foster homes. Now, 1 foster home turned into 2, 2 then turned into 5, then 5 turned to 10. Then 10 turned to 15, and so on and so forth. And by the time I aged out of care, I had lived in a total of 23 different placements. That is 20 foster homes, 1 group home, 1 special place, and a juvenile detention. You might be listening to this and thinking, why? Why did she live in so many different placements? Well, as I would move from placement to placement, right, I had all these different behavioral issues happening. And what I did not have was a CASA volunteer really just guiding me and holding my hand along the way. And so as my behavioral issues increased, what that looked like to a person who doesn't understand trauma is that this kid is out of control, right? So I was cutting class. I was very disrespectful to adults around me. I was constantly in and out of fights, running the streets, as they would say. And I just was really this very angry young girl, not realizing that it goes a bit deeper for you, honey. Like, you are not just angry, but you've been traumatized, and you haven't really ever had that time to sit and just be a kid and deal with all of that stuff. So my behavioral problems were out of control, and a lot of foster families could not really handle those. And so I was moved from place to place to place. And when I was 15 years old, I had gotten into some trouble, and that landed me in a juvenile detention center where I spent 6 months of my life. And when I got out of juvie, I met a boy. That boy also lived in foster care, and we had what is called a trauma bond. So we were bonded together by our trauma, not love. And when we bonded, right, we eventually got pregnant, and I had a son. Now, here's the thing, like, as I'm in this relationship, I'm experiencing a lot of domestic violence while in this relationship. And the crazy thing is that 1 in 3 adolescents in the United States right now will be a victim of teen domestic violence relationship, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, or physical abuse by a dating partner, right? And so as I'm going through all of this domestic violence, I have a baby. And so rightfully, there was a full-blown case opened to really oversee this little family who now has a baby, and there's two teenagers fighting. The fighting, of course, didn't stop because my son's father and we didn't have the tools to stop it. And so eventually the fighting got so bad that my son ended up experiencing abuse by way of his father, and I found myself in an emergency court hearing. It felt like it was me versus the state versus my son's father versus the world. And in walks in my CASA volunteer. Her name is Elizabeth. And Elizabeth was very much like you, that adult who refused to give up on me, that adult who didn't see me as a foster child, but rather a child who lives in foster care. You see the difference? So a child is never a foster child. They are a child that lives in foster care, period. She saw that I was a child who was hurting and was in need. And Elizabeth advocated for a safety plan for my son and I. And that safety plan looked like my son and I being able to stay together as a family unit, and me to be able to get myself together. And the magistrate agreed. And so that special place I mentioned that I lived in was a teen parenting homeless shelter. I stayed there for 2 years of my life and got my GED, went to some college, and eventually at the tail end of living there, I was discovered by a modeling agency, one of the top agencies on the West Coast, which is where I'm from. And my modeling career took off, and I ended up moving to New York City, right? And I very much had this experience where I was using my modeling for a long time to try to make me forget about my childhood trauma. But we all know that that's not the way trauma works. Trauma is literally embedded into who you are. And without healing, it can really control a lot of your decisions, control your entire just well-being, right? It can just take that away. It can rob you from peace and rob you from joy. What we now know is that when someone is embarking on the healing, that's how you transform your traumatic experiences into triumphant ones. But I didn't know that yet. And so as I'm going throughout the world and modeling, and then eventually ended up getting married and having another child, I'm still not dealing with my trauma. And unfortunately, when I was married, I also married someone who was abusive. Now, how did this happen? Well, I often like to say that we repeat what is not repaired, right? We repeat what is not repaired. And so because I did not do a lot of that healing work, I found myself repeating a lot of these cycles. And then I had a nervous breakdown. My world just stopped. And now that I look back, I'm glad that it did, because I needed to stop. I needed to really face my reality, make a lot of healthier decisions, and really understand that my pain could be flipped into purpose if I just did the work. Pain flipped to purpose, wounds to wisdom, and traumas to triumph. So I stopped modeling for a very long time because I wanted to understand what this whole idea of beauty actually meant. What I found along my journey was that it had nothing to do with the way I looked. Nothing. It was my ability to not become like the adults who once harmed me. It was in the ability to disrupt harmful patterns in my family's life. And it was also flowing in purpose. And so during this time of me not modeling anymore, I stumbled upon statistics that exist for youth in foster care. As of today, some of them are that 3% of youth in foster care will graduate college. 3%. That over 25% of youth in foster care will end up becoming teen parents, that over 36% of youth that live in foster care will experience homelessness, and so on and so forth. These statistics really upset me because, number one, I hit them all. And never did I say, someone should do something about that. I decided to do something about that. And then, along my journey, I discovered CASA, the organization. Like, I remembered them as a child, but I really didn't know much about them from the perspective of being an adult. And I decided to partner with CASA on a national level, spreading my message of hope, but also really talking about the importance of the CASA programs continuing. Because we know now that when a child has a CASA volunteer, the outcomes that I mentioned for them are far less likely to happen when there is a CASA volunteer present. We also know that when someone is a CASA volunteer or they're supporting the program in whatever that way that looks like, it increases dopamine within that person. So healing is happening for that person, but also for those that they serve. Also, did you know that Oprah Winfrey actually used to live in foster care? So did Nelson Mandela. So did Steve Jobs. So did Tiffany Haddish, Willie Nelson, Malcolm X, Eartha Kitt, and so many other greats. And the one common denominator they all have is that there was a supportive person along their way. Someone just like a CASA volunteer that said, no, I'm not going to let your outcome be anything less than amazing. Recently, I had the pleasure and honor of visiting CASA in Midshore, and I was blown away by the kindness of the people, the tiny house that I stayed in, and just the CASA team there. How much you all are really supporting all youth in your 4 counties on a daily basis. You're on the front lines. You are doing the work, and I'm like, I love them. Every CASA program in the United States needs to model their program after what you're doing. And so it was my honor and pleasure to spend time there keynoting and listening to the people. And what I walked away with is the knowing that the CASA program has to continue. Not just CASA at Midshore, but CASA on a national level. So as you're hearing this, I would like to invite you to consider ways that you can support youth that are in foster care. Not everyone can and should be a foster parent. There are other ways that you can also support youth in foster care. A lot of us have to carry our things in black trash bags when we're moving from placement to placement, right? So maybe in your respective communities, going out and doing luggage drives. This is a way to support youth in foster care. You can also consider becoming a CASA volunteer. We ask for about 10 to 15 hours of volunteer time a month. That's nothing when you think about it. Heck, there's been times that I've spent 8 hours on social media, right? So 10 to 15 hours a month. Think about becoming a CASA volunteer. You can also, do the luggage drive so our youth don't have to carry their things in the black trash bags. And can donate. Every dollar that you donate ensures that the CASA program will continue and that lives will continue to be touched. So I just want to say that I am so full of gratitude for your support, for your time, for your attention, for your love, for your compassion, for your understanding that youth that live in foster care, they are not to be the forgotten ones. They are also very much our future. We never know who that child might become. And with your support, you will change harmful outcomes that might have existed for these youth. So I thank you and I send you love. Peace.